All right, so I'll get this show on the road here. I've got quite a lot of material, so I'm going to rush through it pretty fast. And let me just bring up my slides here. So I'm going to talk about Vancouver technology history, and it sounds like I'm going to talk about what I know about it in the largely in the areas that I've worked in, but also I'm going to introduce you to some resources where you can go find out more if you're interested in that sort of thing. And so I'm just going to press on, and if anyone has any questions, you can ask away or wait till the end, and we'll hopefully have a bit of Q&A time at the end. So the overview of the material I will bring up. I'm going to talk first of all what I call my personal history, which is basically my bio, and I'm going to introduce you to something called the Tech Map and the Centennial Booklet, and then I'll show you the history wiki that we have for the Vancouver section, and then finally the oral archives and a call to action. I'd like your help on a few things. So this is all about me. I was born in the north of England back in mid-1950s, and in the north of England we weren't really encouraged to be academic, and so just like many of my family, I left school at 16 and started a technical apprenticeship, and I was fortunate enough to go to the University of Manchester and work in the physics department there, which was very interesting from somebody who is technical like myself. And this is really where I met my first love. No, it wasn't my wife, it was a computer. This is the HP 2100, and we had this in one of the labs, and I would boot it up, which was a fascinating experience because back in the day you didn't just switch on the computer, you had to key in about a dozen instructions in that panel on the front, and then select run, and once you did that it would read the paper tape reader, and then once it finished reading the paper tape it could read the first sector on the disk, and it was just that sense of achievement that you got starting this machine, and as I say, it was just exciting. So I got really interested in computers, which is where the rest of my career went. Also, while at university, one of the profs there saw that I had potential, and so did a lot of studying and eventually went to university in Wales, and maybe excelled a little bit because I stayed on for a full 6 years and eventually got my PhD. And that's where I met my second love, who is my wife. And then after that I worked for a short time for Plessy, and then that was only about 6 months before I moved to Hewlett Packard, a computer company. Had some fun there, and then got recruited by McDonald Detweiler out of Vancouver to come over here. Worked on a European Space Agency project for the European Remote Sensing Satellite, which was very interesting. We'll see about the connection between MDA and Mobile Data International, and I got subcontracted out to MDI, and eventually moved there permanently, and that's where I spent probably the next 12 or 13 years, where MDI was taken over by Motorola, and worked in the wireless data division. So that's a little bit about my career. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so I had a slide here showing what we did at MDI. They were in the business of mobile terminals, which were used for things like this was used for emergency services and like the police and fire and so on, and eventually I worked on standardization of data over cellular systems. Anyway, moving along. So why did I get interested in history? And in part, it was talking to people in these companies I worked at, and they had some great stories, and I used to enjoy listening to their stories. But the real key was this gentleman, Jim Spilsbury, and he came to a Vancouver section AGM as a keynote speaker, and I was just completely fascinated by the story, and wanted to make sure that we recorded the story. This is actually a little video, so you can see a little bit about Jim Spilsbury, and I'll just play this, and you can.
The incident that sparked my first interest in radio, as it is now called, it was called wireless then, was the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. We were in a real estate office, my dad and I, in New Westminster, when the news came through on the telegraph, the sinking of the Titanic and all the details. Somehow, the Titanic was able to get a so-called wireless message, which was picked up by several other ships hundreds of miles away and went to her assistance. And how you could send electrical messages through without wires fascinated me.
So that was Jim Spilsbury. He passed away quite a few years ago, but he did write a couple of books on his life, and if you can, you should read those. He really was a true pioneer. He used to take a boat up and down the coast of BC, visiting the mining stations and repairing and installing radios, initially just broadcast receivers, but also he developed communication equipment and deployed that. But his life was absolutely fascinating, and I realized when I heard Jim that that these pioneers with these interesting stories eventually are going to pass away, and I wanted to be involved in keeping that history for posterity, because I wanted the next generations to be able to see our history. So that's how I really got started. And
that sparked my...
I need to stop that again. If you're interested in old radios, the Spilsbury radio is at the what we call the Spark Museum. It's the Society for Preservation of Antique Radios in Canada, which is located in Port Coquitlam. And what you see in this little image here is the simulation of the Carpathia, which was the ship that rescued the people on the Titanic. And at the back there's a Spark transmitter, which I think is really fascinating. Great place to go visit, and it's free. They invite you to make a donation. It's open on Sunday afternoons, so you can check that out. It's more like I'd say a warehouse full of radios rather than what you might expect from a highly polished museum. Anyway, one of the things I came across about the time I was leaving Motorola in the just after the year 2000 was the BC Tech Map. This was a thing that was produced by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they produced a number of copies of this. This is a huge map. It's about 4 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and it shows the genealogy of all the tech companies in BC. If we go in closer, if I can do that, you can see some of the companies that I worked at. So down at the bottom here, actually let me turn on my pointer. Down at the bottom here, you've got McDonald Detweiler, and there were McDonald Detweiler. Well, they were one of the first really high-tech companies in BC, and they spun off quite a large number of other companies. So they spun off Mobile Data International, where I worked. Out of MDI, there were a few others that were spun off, like Mobile Data Solutions Inc., and eventually MDI became Motorola, and then Motorola, the big thing that came out of Motorola in the communication area was Sierra Wireless. And this is largely where I've been involved, and it's where I've captured a lot of the stories that I'm going to be sharing today. So the tech map has been updated. What it looks like now is this. So it is available online and rather than printed copy. Actually, maybe there is a printed copy, but it's a very busy map, as you can see. And if we zoom in again to the origin, you can see down here McDonald Detweiler again, and all these lines representing relationships between McDonald Detweiler and various companies that have spun off. And it's a very busy chart. I find this not as useful as the original, or the one that I have in print copy. It's just too busy. But I imagine this is a database, and it's useful. It's a useful tool for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Anyway, moving along, I because of my interest in history, I got invited to contribute to the IEEE Vancouver section centennial. The section was formed in 1911, so 100 years later, in 2011, we had a lot of celebrations, and one of the things that we produced was a centennial booklet. And you can see here what we had in there. It's quite a big publication. We managed to find some old articles and republish those. So this one is from 1984, a history of the Vancouver section. And then we found an earlier one back in 1941 on early recollections in the power industry. So the early history of the IEEE in Vancouver was really the power industry, generating power, and the trams providing public transport. Interesting in that photograph there, unlike today where we have street lights, the early lights were actually these arc lamps, and there was just one of them for the city, providing that illumination. So the other thing I did was I wrote an article myself, and really bringing it up to date for the last 50 years or so on, I guess, my recollections. I interviewed a few people to get some content and put in here. So that booklet's available. I'll give you a link to that in a moment. So what's the other thing? The wiki. So let me show you, if I can, the wiki. So there is something called the Engineering and Technology History Wiki, and let me go back to this one. There we go. Did I get that? Yeah, this is the live wiki. So first of all, what is a wiki? You're probably familiar with Wikipedia, which is a big encyclopedia, but the main point of a wiki is that it's community contributed. So it's what we call crowdsourcing. Anyone can go in and contribute to the wiki and edit it and put in new content. So that's the idea of this Engineering and Technology History Wiki, which is a website of the IEEE. So we have a page on the History Wiki for the Vancouver section, and it provides a little bit of background, some history articles. So this is where I've posted the where is it? No, these are the three articles I just talked about, and then we've got some artifacts. Where are the artifacts? They're down here. So this is where you'll find the Centennial booklet as one of the artifacts. The IEEE recognises historical milestones, and for the Vancouver section we have 5 here. We've got the broadcast television broadcast transmitter on Seymour, first television broadcast in Western Canada in 1953. We have the the Trans-Canada Microwave System, which is the southern microwave system. There's a northern one, and we'll hear John McDonald talk about that in a moment. That was only celebrated in the last year, and there's a plaque in the Telus building in Burnaby for that one. The first astronomical observation, and that's the Dominion Radio Observatory in Penticton, another interesting place. If you're interested in amateur radio, don't take your radio. They don't like radios in that valley. the first 500 MeV proton beam, which is the Triumph cyclotron. And again, there's each of these milestones has a plaque at the location to recognize the achievement. And the final one goes to McDonald Detweiler, the first digital processing imaging of a spaceborne synthetic aperture radar. And there's a plaque in, I think it's the foyer of MDA for that one. So we've got some historical milestones, and the thing that really I've been working on is this oral history, which is capturing the stories of what I call the pioneers, the people who have been instrumental in creating the technology. So you'll recognize some of the names here, especially the people who've worked at MDA or MDI because of the relationships. And I'm going to play some of these audio clips in a moment. Just on the subject of oral history, on this site of the Engineering Technology History Wiki, there are a very large collection of oral histories. So this is the oral history page, and they're sorted by categories. But if you look down here, each one of these is an oral history, and it just goes on and on. There must be thousands of them here. I haven't explored this very much, but I think that's a fascinating resource that we have. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slides here and move on a little bit. So we talked about that, and we did that. So some of these oral histories, we have. I think this is an interesting thing. I don't think Bill Rogers is necessarily a pioneer, but he has an interesting story to tell. If anyone's familiar with Bletchley Park, that is the secret code cracking facility in England where they broke the German Enigma code. And we have our own Bletchley Park here. It's not available as a museum, but this is the secret radio receiving building that is called the Vancouver Wireless Station, and this is sitting in the middle of Boundary Bay Airport, and it was used to intercept Russian aircraft traffic, where at the time they were sending Morse code, or CW as we call it. So Bill here is just telling his story about what they did in this facility.
Okay. Receivers. We had what we called, from a wartime, we called them ACAR 88s, but they were AR 88s, or Alpha Romeo AR 88s, and SP 600s. And then later on, I guess about 65 or something like that, we went to Raycalls from Britain, made in Britain. They were good receivers. Well, all of them are good, actually. And typewriters we used were what they called mill typewriters. They were all capital letters and Russian letters. I don't know how many different letters the Russians had. We called them barred letters when we typed Russian. And the receivers, each position had 2 receivers and a typewriter and books to check on things, look things up, call signs and stuff. The receivers. We didn't have transmitters, though. We didn't send anything. It was only receiving.
There's a transmitter room down in this corner.
That was cipher, though.
Right.
Cipher transmitter.
So that was the transmitter for sending the...
But it was all coded that went out, yeah. We couldn't touch that. You weren't cipher. You weren't allowed in there, actually, unless you were a supervisor. We had secret documents, and they had a red rim around, half-inch rim around them, and you had to account for them every shift change. So anyway, when I was brand new there, the lowest man on the totem pole, I was given the job of burning. We had garbage cans here, And I was given the job of burning the garbage. So one day I burnt the garbage, and next day they were missing a document. So they had a big inquiry, and they went through the ashes, and they found one of those clips for files, and they found 13 pages on it, and there were 13 pages on the document missing. So anyway, they had me in and everybody else that did the burning and asked them if they saw that file, and no. And they were green bins about this wide, this, and about that high, and one of the documents got pushed into the bin, and so anything in the bin is fire, So I didn't realize until many years later, I got to thinking about it, and then I remembered this document, that I had burnt it, but I didn't know it at the time. I forgot all about it. So that was in the furnace room downstairs.
Okay, so that was the first of the recordings. The next one I'll go on to is John McDonald. John McDonald was the founder of McDonald, Detweiler and Associates, MDA, and again, John passed away about 3 years ago, 2019, and I feel very fortunate that we managed to capture his story. So I have about 2 hours of him talking about what happened at MDA, which is on the oral archive. But here's just a little clip for you.
Well, it was an interesting time. This was in 1968-69. The idea of real-time digital systems was a new idea at that time. And the idea that you could do this with mini computers was maybe not heretical, but all quite close to it. What happened is, of course, Lenkert Electric, which was in many ways the pioneer technology company. I remember in British Columbia, I remember when I was graduating. I graduated from UBC in '59. Of course, I went to grad school, so this wasn't an issue for me. But if you were interested in advanced technology, Lenkert was really the only place. Of course, it became NPR and all the rest of it. If you wanted to pursue a career in advanced technology, you had to go somewhere else or go to Lenkert. Anyway, at that time, in the late 60s, of course, their main business was manufacturing and selling microwave components. But they also had a product line in supervisory control of microwave systems. That's what they did. They had a product which was called the 51 series. Anyway, at that point in time, the state of the art was these were basically hardwired logic systems. You had these great big annunciator panels, and if something changed on a mountaintop somewhere in the microwave link, a buzzer would go off and a light would light on this panel telling you where it was and giving you some idea what happened. They were bidding for the supervisory control of what was in those days called the Northern Interprovincial Radio System. We already had a microwave link across southern Canada. This was the one to go across northern Canada. It went from Vancouver up to somewhere around Dawson Creek and then crossed the Alberta border and on into Edmonton and so on down the northern side. Their competition was saying they had a computer-based supervisory system. And of course, the people at Lenkert had no idea how you would put together such a thing. There was no software expertise at that stage. There was no knowledge of how you'd interface a computer to this thing. I mean, computers were for the accounting department, The idea of real-time digital systems was quite foreign to many places, including Lenkert. The salesman that was trying to sell this, his name was Jack Abbas, and Jack, of course, had a sales problem. So he asked me about this, and I said, well, I know how to do that. That's pretty straightforward, actually. We talked to Jack, understood the problem. Vern Detweiler, who I had met on a train in 1954 going up to northern BC for Christmas. We both came from the north. He came from Smithers, I came from Prince Rupert. And I had a couple of guys working for me, Ken Moran and Ron Spilsbury at the time, in a research project I was doing at UBC. I talked to these guys about it. We figured we knew how to solve this problem, and so we formed a company, and we ended up calling it McDonald Detweiler and Associates because we ran out of other names. The government kept turning us down for various names we could think of. We thought that, well, we'll use our own names. And Vern and I were the best known of the four. Right. And so that's what we called it. And the federal government, we did a federal incorporation right from the get-go. And the federal government came back and said, well, it's okay as long as you take responsibility for the conflict with the three companies in Ontario with Detweiler in their name. And I thought, McDonald's a far more common name in Canada than Detweiler. This is interesting. Anyway, we got the name, which was the objective of the game.
Okay, so that was John, and as I alluded to before, there's a lot of relationship between these companies. McDonald, MDI, we'll hear from Norman Thoms in a moment. But another of the key players was this gentleman, Dan Gelbert, who we'll hear how he got involved in MDA. But he was also involved in the transition to, or the spin-off of MDI. He worked on the early mobile data terminals, and in his interview, he talks about that. And you can also see he's a very interesting character. He is a collector, as you can see from all the artifacts he's got in the display behind him. This was at his home. And for people who know Dan, he is very much a mechanical engineer, and he has a basement with a full engineering workshop, which is fascinating. He also has a YouTube podcast, and one of the podcasts he does a tour of his workshop, which I'd also recommend. But in this little clip, he's talking about how he first came to Canada and eventually joined MDA.
So I came here, and at those days it was before internet. So the first thing I did, I opened the Yellow Pages and looking for electronics to look for a job. After 4 pages of electrolysis for ladies, so there was a very, very short section with maybe about 6 lines of electronics, and I immediately sent an enthusiastic letter to all the few companies listed, saying that I'm very interested to work for them and all this. And I remember that the results were disappointing because 2 companies were already out of business since between the publication of the Yellow Pages until my letter arrived. And anyway, to make the story short, I didn't had much success, but then I found some company which was looking for a technician, and since I only had money for 4 weeks or even less than that, I couldn't be choosy. Okay, so I just took any job there was. And so the reason I didn't go to MDA right away, because it turns out later that MDA was listed under data processing in the Yellow Pages and not under electronics. And I wasn't sophisticated enough at the time to look under anything other than electronics. After I worked there for almost a year, I think, some friend of mine, also from Israel, came here, we came together. He sold his car to somebody who used to work at MDA. Or he bought a car, actually. He bought a car for somebody who used to work for MDA. And the fellow started talking to him, where he's from, what he's doing, and he said it's electronics. He said, why didn't you apply to MDA? So that was the first time we heard about MDA. So only because of the used car, I heard about MDA. And I went there, and I was hired. And another funny story, because before I came to the interview, I was again very eager to get the job. And I knew that the head was John McDonald, so I looked up all kinds of papers, everything I could find about John McDonald in the library. I found all kinds of papers of John McDonald. And then I came there to the interview, and they asked me all kinds of questions. What do I do? And among other things, I mentioned that I'm very familiar with the work of John McDonald. I read his papers and all this. And it turns out that was exactly the period that they decided that all MDA employees at the time were students or acquaintances of John McDonnell. They decided it's a very bad idea. They have to bring in fresh blood from industry, which is not influenced by academia and all this. So actually mentioning the fact that I read them almost cost me the job.
I'm going to move on, and the next interview, and these are all basically the companies that I've been involved in, the people I know or have connections with. Norman Toms used to be my boss when I was at Motorola. He headed up the research department, and he left Motorola to found Sierra Wireless, which is another wireless data communication company here in the Vancouver area. So here he's talking about how he got started on setting up Sierra Wireless.
We came up to about mid-92 by the point at which the CDPD protocol was getting pretty close to being a stable standard. A couple of things happened that were, again, fortuitous, as they always are in these things. MPR Teltec, which in turn had come out of Microtel Pacific, if you recall the history, had inherited from Microtel Pacific a fabless chip operation.
Yes.
Microtel Pacific. But backing up a second, at that time it was within MPR. We'll just call it PMC. I can't remember what they called it internally. This was the beginning of the end for MPR. BC Tel, quite rightly, decided that in the new deregulated competitive environment they couldn't afford a massive 500-person research center, which they nearly just stripped and got rid of. But Sierra Semiconductor was sniffing around, understood that high-speed ATM communications, which is what PMC chips specialized in, was a growth area, negotiated with MPR and bought that out, and at that point it became PMC Sierra. A number of Sierra Semiconductor officers were frequently around in the in MPR. You'd meet them at lunch and what have you. I started chatting to them about the wireless business. Their big rival in life was Cirrus. They took quite an interest in the CDPD protocol area. I remember giving a presentation to the executives of Sierra Semiconductor in late November '92, and they were sort of, it's interesting, talk more, maybe sometime later. Around about just before Christmas in '92, Cirrus announced that it was buying PCSI, which at that time had a big lead on us in the CDPD business. They'd been the original consultants to put together the protocol. They had far more people than we had. And on Boxing Day, I got a call from the president of Sierra Semiconductor saying, "How fast can you get your ass down? If Cirrus is bought, we want to be in too." And so we got a handshake as early as January of '93 that they would invest. And I spent about 3 or 4 months looking at other venture capital options, putting together a team and everything else. In May of '93, I decided it was probably the best offer to take, and shook hands on it, and the lawyers finished all their stuff in July of '93. That was the birth of Sierra Wireless.
So as I say, these are only the people that I've managed to contact. There's a small handful, but what I really wanted to achieve from today is the call to action. And the question is, do you have a story to share that would be interested to keep, or do you know somebody who might be willing to do that? And tell me about. I'm particularly interested in what happened in BC and the this sort of genealogy of technology organizations. So if you do, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at my email address. And the other thing, if you're interested, is there's a section on the wiki where you can basically write your history or history of the organization. So I'd invite you to register for an account and make contributions to that. And then the final thing is just I've got some references here. If you're interested in any of these things I've talked about, I've got a lot of references, and I can make these slides available if anyone's interested, and you can check out the links. And with that, I am
Chris.
ready for questions.
Yeah, Chris, is the BC Tech Association familiar with everything that you've done in this wiki page?
I'm not sure what you mean by the BC Tech Association. There are a number of groups. Which one are you referring to?
So BC Tech, I mean, I was a board member when it was the BC Technologies Industry Association years ago, eh?
Right, yeah.
And BC Tech.
Yeah, they're the people that publish the weekly newsletter, aren't they?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they basically have coalesced and spearhead, you know, basically everything going on in the BC tech community. So
Right.
Jill Tipping is president. So if you want any kind of an introduction or connection with anybody, just let me know, because I think they should see this stuff and it should be on their website. Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions or comments, or anyone with any ideas on where I should go next?
Chris, this is Ross. Could you put in the chat the URL of that wiki? I actually tried to search for it, and I couldn't get it to come up.
Yes, I will. It will just take me a moment to get the.
Or is it in that list that you just posted?
It is in the list. Well, actually, it's the parent of that list. Let me just get out of the slideshow here and move some windows around so I can get to it. Oh, the other one, by the way, which is one of my references I didn't talk about, is Derek Spratt has a good history page on Mobile Data International for anyone who's worked in there. So which one do you want? Do you want the Vancouver section or the oral histories?
The Vancouver section that you showed right at the beginning.
Okay.
Is most informative.
I will paste that in the chat right now. There we go.
And I have another question for you. Are you aware of, let's just say, an equivalent to the person doing the kind of work you're doing in the Toronto area or in the East Coast?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I guess that's what my experience has been. I've actually tried to find myself into, a group like this, the chat. Folks in the business, as we all are, but unsuccessfully, unfortunately. There doesn't seem to be the same community out this way. Anyway, thanks.
Okay. I know the Vancouver, the IEEE does have a history group, and I do get emails from them, but unfortunately I don't pay a lot of attention. But yeah,
there was some activity with the recognition of the anniversary of the implementation of the Trans-Canada Microwave System.
Right.
I mean, that was the business I was in, and it was that fascinating to see that and
Right.
the work that was done. And there were a couple of plaques and there were a couple of ceremonies, but it was a very low. The whole thing was disappointingly kind of low key.
Yeah, I thought the same as well. It was almost like it was a secret thing that I don't think many people got invited to the ceremony. I did go to the one at Mount Seymour, which was a few years ago, and that was quite a big affair with an open house at the transmitter, which again was really interesting.
Good. Thank you very much.
Hi, Chris.
Yeah, Carl?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Conrad.
It's
Terry.
I think.
Terry.
Excuse me, yeah. Hi, Chris. So very interesting, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Just a question for you is, what do you enjoy most in the technology history? You've been engaging in all this technology history, and I'm interested to find what do you enjoy more? What gives you that passion?
Oh, good. I don't know. I mean, at school, I was not interested in history because it was all about battles and yeah. Okay, so I think the thing here, and I've watched some of these videos about the origin of the computer industry, and it's because I've lived it, and it's sort of well, it's not really my story. It's my observation of all these other stories that are going on, and I just feel very fortunate that I lived through this period of innovation in technology and especially communication. Nowadays it's a different. With globalization and offshoring and other things, it's not the same as it was when the pioneering work was being done, and that's what I really appreciate, and that's what I want to capture.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's York Blackmore here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hi.
Have you got me?
Yeah. Yep. I can see
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I started at Triumph. I was one of the early people at Triumph, and I started the same year that McDonald Detweiler was starting up.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, our requirements were for a real-time control system at Triumph.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Triumph gave McDonald Detweiler their very first contract.
Oh, really?
It's certainly a very early contract,
Mm-hmm.
and that was for an operating system. And of course, we were using mini computers then.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, of course, over the years, we had many of our people head over to McDonald Detweiler for probably better paying jobs. And also we had a number of McDonald Detweiler people come to Triumph. So we've overlapped.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as I say, it's very incestuous the way all of these companies were so close, and people moving around and spin-offs and all sorts. Yeah, very interesting.
Yes, right.
Anyone else?
No, but I would think Robin Lewis would have lots of stories about Adventures West days. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, one of the people. Okay, go ahead.
Chris, there's also, there's a Vancouver story to tell around the development of the BC's high voltage system, and there are John MacDonald equivalent characters in that narrative. I just wondered, is there any within the history of the section, is there much about that?
But I don't
if I can comment on that,
Yeah.
Chris, we had one speaker talking about the crossing to the Vancouver Island with 500 kV and so forth. This goes back over a year ago. So there has been one speaker. Quite frankly, Conrad, that's a very good idea. If we could allocate someone to do a historical document like you presented today, that would be most interesting. Good,
Yeah.
Good input, Conrad.
Yeah.
Well, I
go ahead.
As I mentioned to Chris earlier, I used to work in Manchester for AEI, and while I was there was a power systems engineer who I worked for, and I was deciding where I would apply, and he told me about this very bright guy called Harry Ellis in Vancouver, and I ended up by working for him in his department, and so saw the development of the 500 kV system. And there was, just as in the telecommunication area, there was some real pioneers, and the system that BC enjoys today. I mean, even the thing that at that time the state of the art was 765 kV in Quebec, and it was Harry Ellis and his team that figured that they could get the same result with 500 kV and series capacitors. And it's quite a story, and the folks like Dr. Gordon Schramm and so on. And so, I mean, it may all be there, but I thought you've really sort of triggered some neurons or something in your talk today.
Yeah, I found the reference to the people I talked to, and I'm not sure if it was Dr. Jose Marti or Dr. Dummel, but they were the people that I talked to. But if you've got names of people who are still around who we could talk to and provide an introduction, I would be happy to follow up.
Good.
Someone mentioned Ventures West a few minutes ago, and I think if you want the real history of the start of Ventures West, the two people to talk to are Mike Brown and Haig Ferris. Mike lives, I think, up in the interior somewhere, but Haig Ferris is still living in Vancouver and very active startups and so on.
Okay, yeah. I think I interviewed Victor Jones, and I think he was involved in the startup of MDI. Yeah. Yeah, maybe you could email me those the contact information. That would be great.
Yeah, I can. Where do I get your email?
So on the write-up for this talk, I did put a link for my email address, but my name, chris.schofield@ieee.org. Schofield is an unusual spelling. It's got a L-E in the middle of it. Oh, I've just realised I got my call sign on the... I did this presentation a couple of days ago for the local radio club, and I didn't realise I'd left my call sign up there.
Chris, it's Ross here. I guess I have another question just relevant to all of this. Do you have any people that you're aware of that way who are former GTE Linkert folks who might have been in the microwave business in the 70s through the 80s for as long as the company was around before they were closed down by the U.S. company? Yeah,
I don't as such, but I know somebody who was an operator on the actually not an operator, but I think he worked on maintenance on the Northern Microwave Link. He's probably in his 90s now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually when I worked for the company called Faranon Electric, which was formed actually down the street from Linkert in California. I worked at Faranon there and met a dozen people at least, I guess, who were formerly Vancouver-based GTE Linkert folks. So again, I'm just curious if there's.
Well, I was actually at Linkert. I was at Linkert Electric back then, and actually I was in the 51D group that we hired John McDonald actually. So I go back before then. I started at Linkert Electric in 1962.
I started at Linkert in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two of us here with a long history of Linkert and NPR.
Okay.
I haven't retired yet.
Really? Okay. So
somebody muted.
So I'm just writing these people down that I maybe need to follow up on. So there was Alistair. Who was the other person who said they worked at Linkert?
It was Chris Huntley.
Chris Hunt.
Huntley.
Huntley. I'm the Chris without a name at the top. I don't know why. But
yes, that's why I didn't know who you were.
Hi, Alistair.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. We'll find out a bit about them.
Yeah, I will say, make a comment that it was rather nice to hear a number of people among your oral histories mention Linkert and NPR. John McDonald, I remember very well, a very fine man, and Norman Thomas I also knew very well. So it's Linkert was a fascinating company, and of course we had a major competitor with Faranon, and we did occasionally hire some people from Faranon one of the best was a Swedish guy called Åke Severinsen, who was...
Åke.
Yes.
I worked with Åke in Montreal when at the time that I first joined Faranon in the facility there in Montreal, and then Åke left and moved out west.
Right.
I was also John MacDonald's lab partner at UBC. We were in the same year, and we did our surveying group together. It was John and I, so it goes way back.
Mm. Oh, this is a really great discussion, and yeah, I think we're getting some good leads here.
I'd like to make a comment here, and I thank you, Chris, on that. And specifically, you're bringing up the need, and we hear from others, to capture the experiences of the group of people that have listened with you today.
Absolutely.
And we need to keep that and find individuals that are prepared to fill in some of the gaps, because there's certainly gaps there. And I want to just say that, and please continue. We have Conrad, a few more minutes. Do we have? Usually we can go over 5-10 minutes if there's questions.
Yeah, no, people can certainly, they're free to leave, but by continuing on, that's fine, by all means. Outbreak of silence.
So let me then say a comment here. Thank you, Chris, for presenting the historical details and the depth that you did, and the sources, and making those available to those that have interest. And as I mentioned before, most importantly, what you've done in your presentation to me is capture the need to find speakers, to record historical. Just looking at the faces, I'm going to be 87 in October, give or take. We're all most of us are in the same category. And I will send to you, Chris, a picture of John MacDonald standing in front of the Monkey House for some comedy relief on those poor commerce people.
Okay, thank you.
Conrad, it's in your hands.
Well, I think that brings it in for a landing. It's noteworthy that in fact we had more attendees than were registered, so that's good. Shows the level of interest. I think the divide that the differentiation we have with our talks, where on some of them where we look back, and others where we look forward at new technologies, is turning out to be a nice split for these talks, and also the fact that we're connecting with folk from across Canada, and last but not least, we're making progress. Our carbon footprint is very low. we should somewhere we maybe should be able to get some carbon credits, but that's another discussion. Maybe we will have a session on climate change at some stage.